All right, we have a lot to get through today, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the Tippy webinar series, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Ashley Durham, and I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement here at the Tippy College of Business. The Tippy webinar series is an initiative of the Alumni Engagement Department. Our goal is to bring the knowledge of our faculty and staff to you wherever you might be in the world. I'm excited to have Jon Garfinkel with us today as he shares his presentation on alumni networks and venture capital financing. Just some information before we get started. We have a lot of content to share with you today, so we will do our best to get to your questions at the end of our presentation. Please put your questions into the Q&A chat box, not to be confused with the chat, as that helps keep me, the moderator, organized and seeing all the questions as they come in easily. You are welcome to email Jon at the end of his presentation with any questions that we might not get to today. As a reminder, all of our virtual presentations are uploaded to the college's YouTube page with closed captions a few days following our live webinar event. Finally, you're encouraged to stay until the end of the webinar so that we can collect your thoughts on today's presentation. Your feedback helps make our virtual programming even better, so we appreciate you taking time to answer our 5-question survey at the end of our webinar. Now, I would like to quickly introduce Jon Garfinkel. Jon is a professor of finance and Henry B. Tippy Research Professor at the University of Iowa's Tippy College of Business. Jon has published in several leading journals and is currently an associate editor at both the Journal of Corporate Finance and at Financial Management. Among many appointments, he has served as the Tippy College of Business as chair of the Online Education Committee and as a member of both the Collegiate P&T Committee and Dean's Advisory Council. Thank you very much for being here today, Jon, and I will hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Ashley. It is a pleasure to be here with our many alumni. I see 50 participants. That's great. And I am here to actually talk about alumni connections, in particular alumni networks and how they have an influence on venture capital financing, in particular of startup companies. I need to start out by recognizing my co-authors on this project. Eric Meyer at the University of Wisconsin, Ilya Strebulev at Stanford University, and Emmanuel Yimfor at Columbia University. So thank you for your attention. Here we go. I think it's pretty safe to say that when we look at the list of companies I've put up on the screen here, they're recognizable. And I want to emphasize that they are highly innovative companies. And when they were first starting out, they were really at the cutting edge. If you think about the more recent set of companies, the first 6, if you want to think of it that way, Apple and Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Tesla, they were all on that cutting edge, developing a product or a service that was really different from what had been offered before. And then we have the other ones like Berkshire Hathaway. They were much earlier, Visa, J&J, and Walmart. Again, they really broke new ground. Now, the thing that I want to emphasize is that these innovative firms were backed by venture capital. We have the dates for the first VC round for the more recent ones, but all of them did get some venture capital financing. And you can tell based on these years of the first VC round and the founded year and the IPO year that VC financing played a really important role, a critical role in getting the company to the point where it could go public. And these are big companies. I mean, we're talking about hundreds and thousands of billions of dollars. So this is really, really large, innovative companies. Now, the other thing that I wish to point out here is innovative companies are crucial to 2 streams of thought. The first one is they make a big difference to the U.S. economy. We like to talk a lot in finance about how innovative companies are the lifeblood of our economic ecosystem as we're trying to maintain U.S. preeminence in the global marketplace. Innovation plays a critical role, and there's a whole stream of research on that in the economics and the finance literatures. But the other thing that I wish to emphasize is that this innovation, this fact that the company is leading edge and doing something that is very different from what has been done before is essentially risky. That's important to remember because when you have an ask out for money, when there is a risky proposition and the company needs backing in order to move forward with their production, not every investor is willing to provide such backing. Venture capitalists have a history of backing risky ventures. And it's because they are good at it, or at least good enough at it, that they were able to generate the wins on some of these investments that will prop them up as they lose on many more investments. And it turns out that most of the wins that venture capitalists have are really, really big ones designed to finance the rest of the projects that they backed that didn't necessarily perform as well. So what we need to remember is that there is a strong element of risk because not everybody understands whether this project by the startup or this idea of the startup is going to pan out. So the question now becomes, which VCs actually do decide to provide this backing? So you've got lots and lots of startups out there. They're all asking for money, and some of them get money from the venture capitalists and others do not. But the VCs are the ones providing it, and we want to know, what is it about this VC and this startup that causes the deal to happen? The natural answer to which VCs provide the money is, well, it's the ones that believe the value proposition of the startup. That's not difficult to understand. They're saying, this is a great idea. I'm going to put money behind it. And then I've got a sub bullet here that basically talks about special cases of oversubscription where everybody knows that this is going to be a successful venture. And so all the venture capitalists would be interested in backing it. And you get something called potential oversubscription. And not every venture capitalist would necessarily be able to provide the backing. These are the unicorns. But really, we care more about this first big bullet. Those who believe the value proposition of the startup are the VCs who are going to provide the capital to back it. Now, there is a second bullet, I'll call it second main bullet, that I'm going to get to towards the end of this talk. It's possible that there's a surfeit of money, that there is just lots of money slushing around in VCs of a particular type that are backing particular venture industries that have at a particular point in time more money than they would normally have. Maybe in those cases, and again, these are special cases, they would provide financing to a marginal deal that maybe they wouldn't otherwise provide money to. And that could lead to that marginal deal being with a favored entrepreneur, somebody with a special friendship. That's not what we think is going on, but we're going to have to investigate that as a possibility as we get towards the end of this talk. Primarily, what we're asking is, who believes, which venture capitalists believe the value proposition, and what leads them to that strong conclusion that they are willing to provide the backing to this startup company? The way that we're going to approach this is through the lens of alumni connections, because as I think we all know, coming here to the webinar, alumni connections really do matter. We think of them all the time when we're looking to hire individuals to a particular company, or in the case of venture capital, we're thinking of backing them. And it does show up in other settings as well, like banking and mutual fund investing. All right. Why specifically in this venture capital setting do we think alumni connections are likely to matter? We think it's likely to matter because information is key with startups. Startups are very, very hard to understand. They are brand new. Like we were talking about at the beginning, they're innovative, they're cutting edge. And so information about whether this is a good idea or not would be incredibly valuable for the VC to have. But the VC doesn't get full information right out of the blocks about whether this is a good idea or a bad idea. A lot of times, a startup has to be out there and operating and making money. And then even scaling up production before it becomes really clear that this startup is going to have staying power and is going to be around for a long period of time. So when they are a startup and there's not perfect information on whether this is a company that's going to be around for the long haul, VCs are looking for additional information. And what we know from prior research, say by Shai Bernstein and company in 2017, is that VCs specifically say the single biggest determinant of whether a startup, about which they don't have perfect information, gets funding from that VC is the quality of the founding team. Now, quality is a nebulous phrase or a nebulous word. And so what we want to do is put some more meat on the bone, and we're going to peel the onion down layer by layer in order to show it. But knowing that a founder went to the same university that the VC who's thinking about providing money went to, and therefore maybe even knowing a bit more about the qualities associated with that founder because they went to, say, Iowa, and I'll give an example in a little while, relative to other universities should be helpful. So what I'm going to offer first is anecdotal evidence that these alumni connections are thought to be valuable by potential investors when they're looking to provide capital to startups. And then we'll get into the meat of the paper where we use all the data that we can possibly put our hands on. Here's your anecdotal evidence. Stanford students, this was talked about in an article in TechCrunch. Stanford students were short-circuiting the VC process by investing in their peers. There was an MBA class that graduated Stanford in 2020, and they formed an investment club that invested strictly in the startups of the classmates. So they went out, they raised a bunch of money from the 175 students, and they claimed, and this is a quote from the article, that this club, the Stanford 2020 club's competitive advantage was largely the personal relationship that it had with the companies it's going to invest in. So, it's a nice anecdote, but we would like to be able to show that these alumni connections really do grease the skids across all the data that we can possibly put our hands on. Now, a natural question that comes up at this point is, hey, wait a minute, you're talking about Stanford here in this example from TechCrunch. Isn't this just an elite school effect? And we will fully admit, if you look here, Stanford University was ranked 6th in the 2019 US News reports. Okay, so they're an elite, just like MIT is. But Stanford had a huge number of firms that were started by their graduates. And there were many, many investors in VC investors who backed startups that also graduated from Stanford. I mean, thousands. But what I want to emphasize is that even though there is a strong link between elite universities and whether the founder from them or a VC that went to them is associated with a deal happening between the VC and the founder, it's not the whole story. It's not just an elite school effect. And the way that I emphasize it is to say, this connection that we're going to explore between a graduate of, say, Stanford that is starting a company and a graduate of Stanford who is backing companies, well, about half the time, there's an alumni connection that I just described. But in the case of MIT, it's only 20% of the time. So it's not just an elite school effect. There's plenty of variation, even within the elite schools, in whether or not there's an overlap between the founder and the investor. Did they go to the same school? All right. So we would like to claim that there is information being communicated, subtle information, or maybe even not so subtle information about a founder and their quality, that information being communicated to the VC because they went to the same university. So what kind of information could we be thinking about? Well, certainly if they went to the same university, then the VC is saying, you know what? I went to MIT. And that's a great school. And I know that it trained me really well. And so anybody else who went to MIT must have been trained really, really well, that there was plenty of information put into that graduate by them going through the classes at MIT. And that's an indicator of this founder is worth investing in when they come to me with a startup idea. That's what we call a direct effect. There's a close cousin to that. Maybe it's just known that, hey, it was really hard to get into MIT. And therefore, I know anybody who gets into MIT, even if it's a founder that I'm thinking about backing. So I'm a venture capitalist. I got into MIT. It was really hard. The founder who got into MIT, well, they must have had to work really hard too, just to get in. This is a signal that they're a high type, and so they're worth backing as an entrepreneur. That's another possibility. We are less concerned with those two explanations. What we are most interested in is the possibility that when you had the founder and the investor going to the same university, even if it wasn't exactly at the same time, maybe they overlapped some, maybe they didn't overlap at all, there was still the opportunity for a network connection to be formed. And that connection can be valuable because you know something about what happens at that university. So, for example, Claire is a graduate of the University of Iowa, got her bachelor's and master's degree here. And maybe if she were working at a VC, she has worked in New York City before in private capital, private equity, but let's say she was just working at a VC for the sake of example. She's an alum of the UI. If she saw lots and lots of potential deals coming across her desk and said, you know, which one am I going to invest in? I've got to make a choice here, or I've got to make a couple of choices. Those deals could be coming across her desk, potential deals, because founders were saying, I want money from Claire, but those founders were coming from maybe Columbia, maybe Stanford, maybe Iowa State, maybe Wisconsin, hopefully the UI as well. What we're going to try to do is show that the fact that one of those founders was coming to Claire, but they were from the UI and Claire was from the UI, that makes a difference in whether the deal gets done and how much money is provided and whether this deal actually works so well that the startup company eventually does get to go IPO. Okay, so this is what we're aiming for. And what we have to really work hard to do, and this is where the research is, call it path breaking, is controlling as best we can for other observable considerations that are likely to influence whether Claire puts money behind a particular venture. All right. So do we see evidence of an alumni connection benefit? You know, we can do this first pass where we can say, hey, look at all the deals that happened in the universe that I'm going to describe in a moment and say, what percentage of them had a connection between the founder and the VC? Did they go to the same school? And it turns out that about 1 in 3 deals had a connection. Now, maybe it wasn't at the same time, but we know that they went to the same school. They went to the same university. So 1 in 3 deals did involve an investor and a founder from the same alma mater. And that is large relative to what we would think of as a normal expectation. And we know that it's not driven by observed concentration of deals among alums from the top school. You know, there's ways that we know that, and it's buried in the paper. That's univariate. Also in the univariate, we can say that, hey, let's look at those deals where there was same alma mater connection. Is there more money going to those than to the entrepreneurs that didn't have a connection with the VC? And the answer is, in the univariate sense, so the average, 40% more, which is a huge amount of money more. That number is going to shift down as we control for other factors. We're going to get to that. Now, the second pass is about controlling for other factors. We're going to run a bunch of regressions, and we're going to have to clearly articulate how we control for all these other factors that are likely to affect whether the deal gets done, how much money gets raised, and whether the company eventually goes IPO. To do all of that controlling, we're going to have to do some matching, and we're going to have a whole lot of data. So the big other driver behind this research was the availability of a new data source called PitchBook. This is the best-in-class data source for startup financing. It is U.S. angel and VC investments from 2002 through 2020, at least in our paper. They keep updating the data, and it contains exit outcomes. Now, we supplement that data with U.S. Department of Education data. College scorecard is the favorite label for it, and it's got school stats. So primarily SAT score on average of incoming freshmen, but also some demographics on the incoming freshman class every year. So that's going to turn out to be useful at the end of this discussion. Finally, we're going to need some other data in order to address one of the main concerns that typically comes up in research in corporate finance. It's something we call endogeneity, and it has to do with, is there an underlying unobservable factor that drives the right-hand side and the left-hand side of the regression equation? We're going to try to deal with that as best we can. That data that we're going to use to address one piece of it is LinkedIn data. And there was a company called Data Hut that basically scraped in 2017 everything they could off of LinkedIn. And some of that data was the company's data set, and some of it was the individual's data set. And it's combinable in certain ways so that we could figure out startups that were either backed by VCs or not. But those startups were formed by graduates of US schools. So we're going to be able to combine all this information, the PitchBook data, the DOE data, the LinkedIn data, to create our basic merged data sets. And they're going to have the following important characteristics. The startups, we're going to know who the founders are, the CEOs, the chief operating officers, chief technology officers, chief marketing officers that attended the largest 485 US universities. And we're also going to know the investors. These are the partners and the managing directors and the founders and the GPs at these VCs that attended, again, the top 485 universities. So that's going to be our data set. And the good news is we got the PitchBook data, and that was really down to Emmanuel. He spent 5 years worth of research budget in order to get that pipe feed. All right, so here we go. The main question is, given a set of choices on which startup a VC is going to fund, so it's looking at a set of them, does that VC favor the alumni connected one? That's a big question. Do alumni connections really facilitate startups being able to get that backing they need in order to roll forward with their scaling up and their moving into, hopefully, public ownership? What we need to, again, control for are factors that influence both the deal decision and maybe whether there's an alumni connection that might have happened. So it could be that universities specialize in graduating entrepreneurs in a particular industry. We're going to need to control for that. Maybe universities graduate a lot of finance types that stay in the area. So maybe they go on to become VC investors. And maybe there's a temporal correlation. We're going to try to deal with that in some of our follow-on tests. The best control that we can come up with as we're thinking about the set of companies that a VC is looking at and deciding which one to back is to recognize that VCs tend to focus on investing in a particular industry, investing in a particular state, and in a particular year, things can happen that mean, hey, there's a lot of money going towards a particular idea right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a population of, well, it's really a sample of possible startups that the VC is going to look at as they're deciding which one to fund, and they're going to be called counterfactuals. They've got to be this similar because VCs do tend to focus on industry, state, and year. What we're going to do once we have that set of possibles is we're going to run a regression where we have a dependent variable that's 1 if the deal happens and 0 if it doesn't. And then we're going to ask whether another variable on the other side of the regression equation, so an explanatory variable for same alma mater, whether that makes a difference. Let's see if we can show this visually. I'm unable to fit all 5 investors, call them A, B, C, D, E, without making the font too small. So just imagine that down below A, B, and C investors, there's investor D and investor E. And let's just hypothetically say they're all looking at the same 5 deals. Now, these 5 deals are in the same industry, and they are in the same state, and they got funding in the same year. Okay, so what we're really saying is there are 5 venture capital deals where venture capitalists backed a startup. Well, you could say it was in 2005. The question is, how did investor A choose to back company in deal 3, while investor B chose to back the company in deal 2, while investor C chose to back the company in deal 4, and maybe the investor D chose to back the company in deal number 1, and the investor E decided to back the company in deal 5. Okay, how did those choices get made, and were they influenced at all by what we call same alma mater? So investor A went to the same university as the founder of the company in deal 3, but B did not go to the same university as the founder of the company behind deal 2. And investor C did not go to the same university as the founder of the company in deal 4, but maybe investor D went to the same university as the founder of the company in deal 1, and maybe E didn't have the same alma mater. So now the question is, okay, that's 40% matching, same alma mater. Does this make a difference? When you run the regression, the answer is yes. Okay, so running this regression, we find that same alma mater, which we had here in this column, makes a difference to whether the deal gets done. Now, it's really, really important to control for the number one thing that everybody talks about. Oh, it's the skill of the entrepreneur. Okay, what was the mean SAT score of all of the students who went to that university? Does it make a difference? Well, in our first regression here, it doesn't seem to make a difference. But what does make a difference is this same alumni connection. The VC went to the same school as the entrepreneur, and that increased the probability of this deal getting done by about 20%. So that's a really, really important number. Now we go on and we say, well, maybe the SAT score is still worth exploring, but interacted with same alma mater. And the reason we think this is because we're wondering whether this same alma mater connection accelerates the importance of the talent as proxied by SAT score of the founder, or whether it substitutes. Well, it turns out it substitutes. So this negative coefficient means that when there's same alma mater between the founder and the investor, in that case, it matters more when the SAT score of the school that they both went to was lower. It's a substitute. We know that high SAT scores seem to indicate quality. So maybe that would make a difference to whether or not the deal gets done, although our evidence says it's not really that clear. But it's especially the case when the scores are a little bit lower and you're kind of wondering, what is the skill level of the individual coming from this university? Well, same alma mater makes a big difference. And then we explore whether these connections are time series related. Were they in school at the same time? Was overlapping graduation? So they share at least 1 year together on campus. Okay. Yeah, that makes a huge difference. And it's incremental to this same alma mater effect. what if they both went to the same school within the university? So they both went to the Tippy College of Business, for example, as opposed to one of them went to CLAS and the other one was a Tippy student. Okay. When they were both within the same specific school or college underneath or the umbrella of the university, that made a huge difference. And in fact, it subsumes the same alma mater effect. It's all tied up in these cases with attendance at the same college within the university. Or maybe they both got an MBA there, or maybe they both got a bachelor's there. These are things that tell us more about overlap and the influence of it on this connection potentially. So we especially like the overlap in graduation because it means it's maybe more likely that they had some sort of interaction. And the same thing when it comes to, oh, they both went to the Tippy College. All right. One of the challenges that we face is that all of our counterfactuals, so these are the potential deals that investor A was looking at, and B was looking at the same potential deals, and C was looking at the same potential deals, and D was looking at the same potential deals, and so was E. All of these were created in the data set because they were deals that happened. They occurred in the same state, in the same industry, in the same year as the deal that we're actually focusing on. Well, that's problematic because a whole lot of ideas don't get funded by venture capitalists. There are plenty of entrepreneurs out there that would love to receive money, but they just don't get it. And referees have rightly asked us as we're trying to publish the paper, well, how do you distinguish whether there's something different about the deals that got done versus the deals that didn't get done, and whether alumni connections make a difference in getting the deal done when the investor was looking at a whole lot of possible deals to do, many of which never get funded. Okay, so there's a different distribution of quality of idea, perhaps, in their question. So we went and got the LinkedIn data from Data Hut, and we reconstruct our counterfactuals, whoops, right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if you will, but based on, hey, remember investor A? They funded company 3. Now the question is, are there companies in the LinkedIn companies data set that were listed as, they're obviously seeking capital, but they're in the same industry as company 3, they're in the same state as company 3, but they didn't get money, but they were founded in the same year as company 3. So that's a brand new question. Would they have gotten funding if they had been alumni connected? It looks like it would increase the odds. So using this new sample, if there's the same alma mater between the venture capitalist investor and this founder who's got their company out on the LinkedIn companies data set asking for money, yeah, that increases the odds of whether they are able to get VC backing or not. So that's what we call our main set of results, the extensive margin results. We have a potential causal explanation that I'm going to skip over, but if there are questions at the end about, is this really causal? And what about VC partners that depart? I can answer that, but I've noticed that I'm a little bit short on time. So I'm going to go on and start talking about what we label the intensive margin. So on deals that do happen, does the alumni connection make a difference further? So the deal is done. Now, do they get more money in that deal? And are they more successful moving on to eventually IPO? So the first question, do they get more money? The answer is yes. Now, in the univariate, I said they got 40% more money. Once you control for lots of stuff, then it's still 20% more money when it's an alumni connected deal. Same alma mater is associated with a coefficient on the log of funding raise, 18.25%. So it's really, really powerful. 20% more money is important. Now, it's also important to recognize that this is a commitment. This is not just a favor, okay? The venture capitalist is putting more money behind this entrepreneur. If it was just a favor, then it becomes an increasingly expensive favor if they're putting more money behind it. But they believe that this is a good idea. So we've talked about two possible interpretations. The one that we like to focus on why these alumni connections matter to VC backing of entrepreneurs. It's because they're getting extra information. That's what we would like to investigate as thoroughly as possible. There is the alternative that is a favor. And again, we don't believe that's the case, but one of the ways that we can actually try to put some testing behind it is to say, if it was really just a favor, or this is homophily or taste-based discriminating between this choice and that choice, then it's less likely that this backing would lead to great success and therefore an IPO. So we look at IPOs by all of the deals, whether IPOs happen or not, on the full set of deals that we were exploring, and same alma mater makes a 50% difference. That's a huge difference. It's going from odds of roughly 6% of all of the deals that got done eventually going IPO to a higher number by 2.6%. That is a really, really, really big increase in the likelihood of an IPO. IPOs are where venture capitalists make their money. When they provide backing to an entrepreneur, they're buying a stake in the company, and they're hoping that the value of that stake is going to rise. And the best way for it to rise is when the company goes public and they're able to raise significant capital and continue to expand and raise their value. So what the venture capitalist is hoping for is an IPO, and that's where they get what we like to call that 10x payoff. Okay, it's 10 times what they invested. That's what supports the rest of their operations. It's when they get those big wins. So an IPO is like gold, and same alma mater is associated with much higher likelihood of that startup eventually going IPO. All right. It's time to address a couple of niggling doubts that have been raised during the review process. One of them is, gosh, what about that marginal deal? What about the one that, wouldn't otherwise have been made, but it's a favor or something similar? Okay. Is that really valuable? And does the same alma mater connection increase the odds that this is still going to be a successful deal? Eventually, the company will go IPO. Well, one way to think about this is to create a variable that says, hey, marginal deal, because there was just lots and lots of money slushing around in a particular industry. So you might think right now that venture capitalists are going out and saying, hey, we're raising money for a new fund and we're going to invest in AI. Okay. All those startups that are willing to come out with a new generative AI product. Okay. Oh, well, lots of investors might be willing to put money into the venture capital fund, and then that venture capital fund has to say, okay, how am I going to allocate this money? Okay, they are now the representative investor. They've got so much money. Maybe they don't know what to do with all of it. Maybe there's so much money that they're going to say, you know what? This last deal that we're doing, it's maybe small or whatever it is. It's the last one we're doing with our big pile of money. Most of the deals are really good ones, but this last one, it could be a marginal deal. Does that deal still do better when it was alumni connected or not? Now, you can't tell which one was the last deal that the venture capitalist made, but what you can say is when there was a whole lot of money slushing around in a particular backing area, so you could say it's AI now, or maybe it was biotech back in the 90s or the 2000s, or maybe just before the 2000s, it was the tech bubble. If there was lots of money sloshing around at that point, that's an indicator for there was a marginal deal probably happening. So does this indicator still show that alumni connections are powerful in getting the backed startup to an IPO? And the answer is yes. And the way to see yes is to look at column 1 versus column 2 here, where we say, what's the likelihood that the startup eventually gets to IPO? And we're not looking at the controls over there in 3 and 4. We're just looking at 1 and 2 here. The proxy for whether this is a marginal deal is the amount of funding within a particular area. So it's a particular industry. It's lots of money slushing around. That is an indicator for marginal deal. It's going to be still increasing in the likelihood of an IPO. That's because more money is associated with longer survival time and greater likelihood of being able to get to an IPO. But column one is the alumni connected deals, and column two is the non-alumni connected deals. And so there's a much bigger effect of extra money sloshing around on the likelihood of IPO when there's an alumni connection. So we think that that is another indicator of, hey, when there's an alumni connection, they know better about the qualities of the startup founder and how to make this thing work so that they can eventually get to IPO. All right, I have just a few more moments where I can talk about really reaching a bit, okay? This is very preliminary evidence, but we think that there are alumni connection values that can speak to some difficulties that we have in society. So one of the ones that has been talked about and talked about and talked about a lot lately is inequality, okay? It's always in the news, and I'm a believer in it, but I think that everybody is also willing to say that entrepreneurship is one way to climb the economic ladder. And so our hope as researchers is, hey, could this entrepreneurship close the gap on inequality? Now, what we are able to say so far in our research is that same alma mater means better outcomes in entrepreneurship efforts, okay? They're more likely to get the money from the VC, it's gonna be more money, and they're more likely to go IPO. So that same alma mater is supposed to be associated with better outcomes. Can this same alma mater be correlated with improvements or moving up the ladder in our economic world? Well, the way that we go about it is to ask this question: do we see more same alma mater deals out of universities where there's a higher percentage in that university's incoming class of Black undergraduates? And the answer here in column 4, where all the controls are going on, is yes. And so it's our belief that undergraduates from minority populations can say, hey, we know that entrepreneurship is a really good way to climb the economic ladder. As long as it's successful, we're going to look for the places where more same alma mater deals seem to have occurred in the history of this university. That's a bonus graph. Let me go ahead and conclude so that there's time for questions. We are asking, to what extent are alumni networks important for startup financing, whether the deal gets done and how much money is behind it, and their success? So whether they go IPO. We know that 1 in 3 deals involve alumni networks, that these networks matter even after we've controlled for SAT score or school prestige and other measures. If you have questions about that, network measures, I can answer them. And that these alumni networks are positively related to the likelihood of the IPO especially. But whether the deal gets done and the size and the investment is crucial too. The alumni networks facilitate information acquisition, otherwise it wouldn't be as likely that they would go IPO, and they may play a role in reducing inequality. And so with that, it looks like I have about 15 minutes left, and I would be happy to take questions. Thank you for your time. I think you're muted, Ashley.
Yes, I am. Thank you. You know, I've been doing this for how many years now? You'd think I'd know to turn off the mute. Well, we have a few questions to get to, so let's get right to it, John.
Please.
What if the venture capital firm is far from, distance-wise, the startup that they are interested in backing?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you, Ashley. So one of the things that we try to do to control for this is we say the set of deals that the investor is looking at had to be in the same industry and state and year. Now, it could be California, it could be Texas, it could be one of the Montana, but a really big state is going to have some distance potentially between the investor and the founder. And there's a lot of evidence out there that boots on the ground and being able to visit the site, look the founder in the eye, and really get a sense of whether they know what they're trying to do with their startup is important. So we control for the distance between the venture capital firm location, the investor location, and the location of the founder. Okay, the founding firm is maybe in Southern California and the venture capitalist is Northern California. So we go ahead and we control for that distance, and it does not absorb our same alumni connection effect.
Awesome. Sorry, let me pull those questions back up.
Yep.
What if the VC and the founder know each other from past work experiences? Does that make a difference?
Yeah, it can make a difference. And in fact, one of the things that I didn't get to talk about during the webinar, but it's, again, buried in the paper, is the fact that we can carve out what we call the set of first deals. The first deal between the founder and the investor shows a much stronger effect of same alma mater. What does that tell us? It tells us that, oh, this is the first time they're getting together. They probably don't know a whole lot about each other. And so same alma mater makes a much bigger difference there. And when you also look at the full set of deals instead of just the first deals, and you put in, hey, there was a past relationship between the founder and investor, that also increases the likelihood that the deal gets done and there's more money. So yeah, that information is important. And that's what gives us confidence that our information interpretation of the value of same alma mater or alumni connections holds water.
So another question, is there a Hawkeye Angel or VC network, much like other institutions have, Duke, Northwestern, and Indiana, to name a few?
That's a great question. And I have to confess, I don't know the answer for sure. I have this vague recollection that David Hensley was talking about putting this together. Now, whether it's been put together or whether it's still work in progress is just not clear to me. I know that there have been conversations. I'm just not fully up to date on whether such a Hawkeye Angel Fund is in existence.
Well, shoot, David was on this webinar. We could have put him on the spot, but I see that he jumped off. So shoot.
Right.
Another question, how do startups connect with angel investors and vice versa? How do inclined angel investors find quality startups?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer. I think of it as push and pull. Okay, there's certainly plenty of startups that are looking for money. And there are lots of ways for them to let the public know. The example that I like to use is the one that's based on our LinkedIn data. If they put their company out there on the LinkedIn companies site, then they're pretty clearly looking for some sort of money. Now, not all the companies out there on the LinkedIn companies site are really in need of money. Some of them are publicly traded companies. Some of them are big, and we throw those out. They're not part of our analysis because obviously they don't need VC financing. But that would be one way that I would think of it. I do remember from very long ago, we had a faculty member, John Spitzer, who was active in an angel fund in what I'll call the Cedar Rapids, Iowa City corridor. But I haven't seen John in years. I'm sure he's doing quite well in his retirement, but I know that there was an angel fund in that Cedar Rapids, Iowa City corridor, and trying to just do a quick Google search and see who's out there and whether they're interested in seeing pitches on a regular basis. That would be a good way of going about it.
Awesome. Okay, how do alumni connections move forward? They went to the same school, but what is it about now that actually makes the deal come together and happen?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. So this is a fun part of the paper that's, again, not time for it during the webinar, but it's buried in the paper. What we did at one point in our analysis was go and collect information on college football seasons. So I'll pull up the appendix Yeah, it's Appendix Table 5 if anybody wants to go get the paper off my website. But Appendix Table 5 really says that same alma mater connected deals are more likely right after a super successful college football season. So the story that we tell, and it's based on conversations with a couple of venture capitalists that Ilya had, our Strebulev from Stanford, was, hey, we get on the phone to talk about just about anything when our team's doing really well. And, oh, you're starting a company, you're looking for funding. Yeah, that seems to happen. Surprise, surprise.
Do you think that will be happening for any of our Hawkeye
Gosh, I
friends
sure
out
hope
there?
so. Yeah. I mean, what a season, right?
What a season indeed.
Mm,
All right. I've heard that there could be multiple financiers in a deal,
yeah.
and two of them might have worked together on other deals, but not necessarily the current deal. Does
Oh,
that make a difference?
yeah, this is a really subtle point. Again, a great question. So let's say, let's say I'm a founder, and let's say Ilya and Emmanuel are potential financiers, and maybe the two of them are willing to jointly back me if things work out. But Ilya and Emmanuel might have worked together in the past on a completely different deal somewhere else. So the question is, would this make a difference on whether I get funded? Well, they can talk to each other and maybe their information sets don't perfectly overlap. And so they can each learn something from the other as they're thinking about whether to back me. And yes, that does turn out to be the case, that their relationship makes it more likely that they will both fund me. But in addition, same alma mater has a different influence when you look at those kinds of connections between Ilya and Emmanuel and my connection to either Ilya or Emmanuel. So it turns out that there's a substitution going on, that if Ilya and Emmanuel are able to communicate together, then that makes it less important that one of those two had the same alma mater connection with me, because information communication can substitute across different settings.
Awesome. Well, those are all the questions I have today for you, John. So thank
Well,
you
thank
so
you.
much for your time, and thank you to everyone for attending our webinar today, Alumni Networks and Venture Capital Financing. When
Thanks,
the event,
everybody.
yes, when the event ends in just a moment, you'll see a quick survey. We'd be grateful if you could share your thoughts and help us make for future virtual programming even better. On behalf of the Tippy College of Business, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Have a wonderful holiday season. And like we said, go Hawks.